The fourth studio album from British hard rock band Def Leppard was a bit of a departure for them. As a result, many of their metal-minded fans simply walked away, while many more mainstream listeners turned them into a huge success. And while we're more than a few decades away from its release, do I still view the record with disdain, or have I found some value in it now? Well, stick around and let's find out. So before I go into this album, it might be relevant to go back to my discovery of their previous record, Pyromania. So I came into this band in January of 1983 when this album was released. Like a lot of American kids into metal at the time, of course, Pyromania also had a catchy pop component to it, but it still rocked hard enough for fans of heavy music to separate it from the other radio acts of the time, such as Night Ranger and Journey. To me, the Def Leppard in 1983 had more in common with bands like Quiet Riot and Motley Crue, who all had breakthrough albums released that year. Pyromania was also a big album for me and was easily one of my most listened to records of that year. I can definitely remember a number of times back then tearing through my neighborhood at 14 on my BMX bicycle, my boombox bungee corded to the bars, and blasting that tape for all to hear. Needless to say, I goddamn loved Pyromania. So 4 years passed by before the band's next album would come out, and given all that time, I was certainly primed for what I expected to be Pyromania's direct musical successor. Of course, that's not what I got. What took its place was a band that seemed familiar, but had completely crossed over to pop music, replete with synthesizers, saccharine choruses, cheesy lyrics, and at least one ballad that could have easily been released by either Foreigner or Loverboy. The Rock of Ages was apparently over. Or at least that's how I felt when I was 18, but for the sake of reasonably interesting video, I'm going to revisit this album for the first time in well over 30 years and see if I feel differently about it. So anyways, let's get to the track by track. Starting with side 1, track 1, we've got Women. So the album opener brings us in with a wailing riff and pounding drums, which quickly transition to electronic drums on full reverb, pulsating synth, and a slowly singing verse section, prepping us for the rockin' chorus. And it is a strong chorus, bringing in those signature Def Leppard harmonic gang vocals, which I'll talk a whole lot more about later. Steady but strong solo work, but it's cut too soon by more synth and electronic drums. Get rid of both, and this would have been a stellar track befitting of some of Pyromania's best material. But even with these elements, I'm still of the mind to say that I like this song. It does the job. Moving on to track 2, we have Rocket. So after some backwards messages and a bit of spoken audio and sound effects, the track jumps to a heavy synth beat, accompanied by analog drums. Guitars here take a backseat to concentrate on the beat more, pretty much throughout. Pre-chorus brings in the synth keys, which is to say that this is the first of the tracks to be very synth-heavy, noticeably more than the previous. Chorus is mindlessly catchy, but not really satisfying. Also not a fan of the oh harmony vocal parts. Bad attempt, I know. Or the extended boogie-style bridge. Solo work is minimal here. Again, the synth is the star of the show, for better or worse. These elements really do usher in the pop influences way too much and undeniably neuter this track. Also, at 6.5 minutes, it really does overstay its welcome and gets boring and repetitive the longer it goes. So yeah, not a fan of this one. Moving on to track 3, we've got Animal. So with this one, we move into more mid-pace ballad material, notably in the verse parts. There is definitely a reliance on this record to have mild verses, built-up pre-choruses, and then punchy choruses in nearly every song. It's a pattern you catch the more you listen to it. Anyways, the pop sound is cranked to full on this one, though there is an attempt to make the bridge and solo sections rock at least a little harder, but not for long. Also, very repetitive. Overall, I wanted to like this, but there just isn't enough here for me to latch on to. So it's a pass. Moving on to track 4, we have Love Bites, and no, not a Judas Priest cover, unfortunately. So this track takes us into full-on ballad territory with an opener of synth effects, robotic vocal intro, and echoing guitar single notes, bringing us to Joe's softer singing style. But as I said before with other tracks, this one ramps up a little with the pre-chorus, and then full-on with the chorus. Honestly, It is a great chorus with a fantastic accompanying riff. In fact, if the rest of the track was as great as the chorus or even this riff, this might have been a solid like. I mean, the songwriting is here and it's good for what it is, but I'm just giving this one an okay. Moving on to track 5, we have Pour Some Sugar on Me. And first off, it's really crazy to think that this is the song that drove Hysteria to #1 on what would become the Billboard 200 chart. Of course, this is easily the most accessible and the most popular track, not only on this album, but perhaps for the band itself. I mean, this is the one everyone remembers this band for, but as you can guess, I'm not as enthusiastic about it. So following the a cappella intro, we get drum and bass beat combo along with intermittent guitar chords. Joe's singing in the verse is almost rappy until the build-up pre-chorus that surprisingly doesn't ramp up to the chorus, making it oddly similar. But it does contain those Def Leppard over-processed gang parts. It's clearly positioned to be a sing-along track, notably the chorus, but the combination of silly lyrics, lack of progression, and clear pandering just doesn't do it for me at all. Moving on to track 6, we have Armageddon It. So guitars and drums start this one off with Joe singing lower register this time. The track has a bit of a swing to it in the verse, predictable and poppy pre-chorus, but then the start of a heavy riff and drum passage for the chorus, but then way too quickly jumps back to the verse. Yet again, a track that has some great ideas, but never explored enough, and then drowned out by mediocre and bland pop preening. Solo is terrible with guitar and synth awkwardly attempting to work together, not to mention a boring bridge. I actually wanted to like this one, but it just falls flat in too many parts. However, Joe does sound pretty good, but again, not a saving grace. So, I'm not having this one. Flipping over to side 2 and track 7, we've got Gods of War. So more effects start this one off with distant guitar wails, giving it a rather eerie vibe, and then going into a cool bass beat with drums and more wailing guitars. Heavier riffing follows, and the verse part is actually pretty good. I especially dig Joe's vocal melodies in those sections. Not as excited about the intermittent gang vocals dropped in here and there, but it's not a deal breaker either. Dropping the synth, even if it was minimal here, would have improved matters as well. Guitar work overall is much better and heavier on this one than on most of side 1 combined, which is much needed at this point. The chorus, however, is a bit of an odd duck here with an almost dreamy synth vibe to it, but also short, so it doesn't stick around long enough to be a nuisance. Digging the solo work here, but also wish there was more of that. Heavy this one up and retool the chorus, and this could have been on Pyromania easily. Kinda dig the outro riff and the samples at the end as well. Overall, the track is fine. Not great, but not bad either. Moving on to track 8, we have Don't Shoot Shotgun. So another a cappella intro, followed by Joe singing over a chord-heavy riff and drum combo for the verse. Riff changes up to something pretty rockin' and almost AC/DC sounding. Of course, you can't get away from those Def Leppard augmented group vocal parts. They're here too. But I gotta say, I'm digging the main riff and some of Joe's swagger here. Pre-chorus and chorus could be stronger though. Even still, I like this one. Some decent harmonic soloing brings in a bit of the older Leppard, so I dig that as well. Yeah, let's call this one a like. Moving on to track 9, we've got Run Riot. This one keeps the rockin' going, but like so many tracks, this too is very beat reliant in the verse. I mean, there's a guitar back there, but Hysteria is full of moments where Joe sings along with some very prominent drums. Maybe too many times. Anyways, verses are fun, pre-chorus is strong, and the chorus just lays flat. Even the solo is rather uninspired, and gotta say, not well played either. So, I'm pretty half and half about this one. Moving on to track 10, we've got Hysteria. So if we had some comparatively semi-ballady tracks on side 1, this one is the most ballady of the bunch. And for a ballad, it's actually well written and well performed. No, really. Of course, it's a pop ballad with some rock flavor added, as opposed to being a power ballad with strong ties to hard rock or heavy metal. But this is Def Leppard changing its spots, if you will. So it's not a big surprise on this record. Regardless, gotta say, I like this one. I wish the solo had gone on longer, of course, but other than that, I'm good with this track. Moving on to track 11, we've got Excitable. So the spoken intro is downright stupid, but thankfully short. Ignoring that, the lead riff is poppy, the synth is strong with this one, and the process gang vocals are all over the place. Too much, actually. It's upbeat and peppy and just lacking any sort of heavy. I feel like a lot of this sounds like goofing around in the studio as if they just threw it together. So I don't feel like I'm going out on a limb by saying that I'm finding this song to be the worst on the album. And not much else to say about it past that. Moving on to track 12, we've got Love and Affection. So lead and riff has that standard dreamy vibe that permeates this album in many tracks. Unfortunately, that choice doesn't unify the work as much as injects some sameness where it's really not needed. Also, this is now the 4th song to have a strong ballad streak through it. Based on all of that, I'm not sure I would have ended the album with this song. In fact, now that I think of it, chopping these last 2 tracks off the album entirely would have shaved 9 minutes off the 62-minute runtime and left Hysteria as the ender, which would have been the stronger and more effective way to close out this album. But I'm not the band, I'm not Mutt Lange, and it's not 1987 anymore, so all you get is my opinions way after the fact. So with that, this track is a no. So here are the point totals, 38%. Kind of expected that, as this is definitely the lowest score I've ever given a record on this show. Surprised that the title track stayed with me all of these years, and also didn't remember just how good Women was. And I definitely forgot about Don't Shoot Shotgun. I forgot it even existed, so maybe consider that one a really good deep cut. But yeah, a lot of zeros makes perfect sense for this one, especially for Pour Some Sugar on Me. Though maybe I was a little kinder back in 1987 to Animal and Love Bites, but just like the band changed, so did I, so I suppose that's the whole point of this show. In summary, the guitar solos are way too short on every track. There are a lot of reused musical elements throughout, including that Mutt Lange gang vocal processing, and the songwriting just isn't as strong as previous records. But don't tell the record-buying public of 1987 that, as it ultimately sold 20 million copies worldwide and managed 7 singles off of it. Given that Pour Some Sugar on Me was the biggest of those, I'm going to say that this one track alone likely sold a whole lot of copies of Hysteria. Because I'm sure if you ask the average radio listener of that time to now name a song off that record, you'll get Pour Some Sugar on Me as the answer. You can pretty much bank on that. Anyways, I feel like if the solos were extended and allowed to heavy up, if the synths were dropped, the gang vocals minimized, and the heavier riffs were to dominate, this record might have scored far better with me. Compared to previous albums, Hysteria really does lack an overall grit to it, replacing the hard rock edge with polished synths and pop-friendly mechanics. It's bloodless compared to virtually anything off the first 3 albums. Of course, they somewhat tried to correct on their follow-up album Adrenalize, but to little ends. And also a bit late come 1992, as we all know. Of course, I know metal fans, old and new, are sharply divided on this one. Some of you love this album and have a whole lot of awesome memories associated with it. Others cringe at the slightest mention of it. If you're the latter, would you be willing to give it another chance all of these years later? And if you like it, what is it that makes this album a winner for you? Let me know that and anything else that makes sense in the comments below. Of course, if this is your first time joining me, just so you know, my name is Matt. This is the Accusation Network, where each and every week I do videos on metal vinyl collecting. I also cover the subjects of classic and modern metal in general. If you like the sound of that, like this video, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already done so, and while you're at it, maybe share some videos with some of your friends. Other than that, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.